At this point in time, the law has changed. It is now just majority rule between the siblings. If there are only two siblings, we still have to have unanimous agreement, correct? And this is for cremation and disinterment.
Yes. Or, changing any sort of burial plans that were already kind of in the works.
Well, let me ask you a side point to that, which probably solves a lot of these problems, are will and testaments, right? So if this already been agreed in a will that's been left behind, like, hey, never disinter me, no matter what, right? Are those things that protect against these provisions? Does the cemetery hold on to that information? Who has it? How does that work?
That's an excellent question. And I don't know that I have all the answers to that, but I will say this.
Because I imagine there's so many.
There's usually going to be
details.
one person or maybe a group of people that goes to the cemetery or to the funeral home to direct what happens. And so to some extent, this video should make them kind of think about what they should be aware of and what approvals they need before they even go to the cemetery. And that's what I was going to say about the duty, right? Is let's say there's only two siblings and you guys both agree. Well, that's simple, right? Sure. But if there's two siblings and one of the siblings knows that the other sibling doesn't agree, but they want to do it anyways, and they go to the cemetery and they say, well, either they never say that there's another sibling, right? They say, I'm the only sibling, right? I'm the next of kin. Or they say, hey, yeah, there is another sibling, but I have their approval. It's fine. They're okay with this, right? And then potentially the funeral home or cemetery doesn't track down that other sibling and make sure, right? Or but if this one sibling out of two does something that completely upends what was expected, what's going to wind up happening, and what a cemetery and funeral home will typically do, is they'll make that person sign what's called an indemnification. And that's a document that says, you're telling us this, we don't know, we're relying on what you're saying. So if we get sued for this, you're going to defend us, and it's on you.
And when you say when you're going to defend us, is that literally, right? Meaning when we think about indemnification, we see this a lot in corporate contracts, right? But when you say that, are you just saying you can't sue us, or are you also saying you're going to defend us? Because that other sibling might come in, guns blazing, they're furious.
Sure.
They're going to come after the cemetery. How could you do this? Cemetery's going to go, your sibling said this was okay. We have this indemnification clause there. That sibling that either intentionally or not intentionally misled the cemetery, do they have to actively protect the cemetery through their legal counsel, or is the cemetery just like, look, I have this indemnification clause, I'm out, it's between you two? What does that look
So the cemetery's not out.
Okay.
It depends on what the indemnification clause says to really see what your duty and obligation is. But the practical aspect of it is, if you're sibling number two in that situation and you didn't know, or the person lied, or they just didn't mention you, or nobody checked with you, right? Or maybe acted against your express, and maybe you've already put your express wishes on the record somewhere and they just disregarded it, right? And so you're going to pursue the cemetery. You're going to say, well, it was your job. The law says you got to get majority consent. You didn't get majority consent. They're going to say, well, this guy said he was the majority or the only person, right? And you're going to say, well, I don't care. They don't have an obligation to me. You have an obligation to me, to the cemetery. So what that second person is going to do is they're going to sue the cemetery. And then what the cemetery is going to do is they're going to turn around and sue the person that made the funeral arrangements, right? And they're going to say, well, if we have to pay, somebody a bunch of money for this, it really has to be you that pays it. And so, it is a word of caution for people that are going to do this. A, make sure you have the buy-in, right, from your family. And B, make sure that when you're, directing funeral plans or making representations on behalf of the family, read what you're signing. Like, what are you promising to do if this turns out to be incorrect?
In the indemnification situation with the cemetery that's turning around and resuing you, right, for, the position that you put them in, is there any sort of protection that you have, or any additional onus and responsibility on behalf of the cemetery that, like, for example, if it went to court and it was like, all you did was take this person's word, have them sign this indemnification clause, you didn't call anybody, you didn't do any extra legwork, not okay. Like you're not completely safe. Yeah.
This is the question that, we have in front of us now, right? Is what duty, what obligation does a funeral home or a cemetery have to, the people that it's serving to make sure to investigate, to perform any investigation.
And is that going to be defined judge by judge at that point? Because it's a question.
Judge by judge, jury by jury, potentially. There's a couple of factors that we've seen that, sway it one way or another, right? So for instance, let's just say you're disinterring somebody that was interred 3 years ago. Okay. And, at a minimum, shouldn't the cemetery go in and check their own records to see who they had listed as the next of kin when you interred them 3 years ago?
Yeah.
Right. And so if you gave directives 3 years ago and there's 3 next of kin, and now there's only 1 next of kin saying he's the only next of kin, well, what happened to the other 2? It's at least a question you can ask, right? So if they don't check their own records, I would argue that that's, huge negligence. At a minimum, you should check your own records.
Right.
The next question is, how above and beyond do they need to go, right?
Right. You send an email, they don't respond, or you send a text, they don't respond.
Well, what if they don't even identify you, right? They never identified a next of kin. Now, there's systems out there, public record searches that aren't super expensive. You could do a public record search. Maybe, look, the question is, we were just talking about laws with should funeral homes have insurance, right? And maybe a funeral home should charge an extra $50, right, out of the $5,000 that they're already charging,
right,
for a record search to confirm that this person is who you say they are and that you are the next of kin the way that you say they are, or whatever.
And I want to highlight that because one of the things we've talked about in more of the corporate law space that you play in is that you are business first in terms of your practice as an aggressive attorney. And I love that you position that as not just, hey, go take on this expense, cemetery, but you're saying you can build this into your process, into your systems that, hey, we're absolutely happy to do this. We have to do a record check just to see if there's any next of kin to protect ourselves. We follow it as a best practice. It's going to be part of the fee structure. You're signing off and acknowledging that you're allowing that. In some of the more complicated situations, and this is probably not true for a lot of people, but like, what do you do in a situation where, and actually this is probably part of the problem that we're dealing with, what I'm about to identify. You have siblings that don't talk, or you have a sibling who maybe even is going through struggles that, mentally ill, alcoholism, they're dealing with these things where they weren't of sound mind at the time that the disinterment or the cremation, which is, was being
it's
requested.
A final type of thing.
And right. Yeah. You can't really undo that with a disinterment. I think we all want to observe the rest in peace idea, and you don't want to do that too many times, but it's more reversible. But like, what do you do in a situation where, maybe you reach out to next of kin, you do these things, and the person was like, they were backpacking in Europe for 4 years without a cell phone. We could not get a hold of them. And now they've come back and complained. Are there, well, I guess in that we hit statute of limitations. I just answered my own question.
We potentially hit statute of limitations issues. We potentially hit, if you've made, well, look, something like a cremation is, as you said, it's this kind of like final thing that you can't undo, which is why, you want this majority approval. And so if you have a person who is, backpacking across Europe with no cell phone for 4 years and you can't get a hold of them, have there been efforts, right? Did you make efforts? And maybe the answer is if you can't, you can't, right?
Okay. And that's going to be judge to judge at that point, right?
So and that's where you have the Orphans Court, right?
Yep.
So the idea is, if let's just say there's 2 siblings and one sibling is just off the map, right? Yep. Well, then there is a step that you should follow as good practice, is you have to say, okay, well, there is this other sibling. For whatever reason, they're unreachable, or they're, not somebody that we're going to get any sort of meaningful response from. So that means you should go to the Orphans Court, and it's a relatively simple filing. You go to the Orphans Court, you get the approval, you disclose this stuff to the Orphans Court. You say, so-and-so is backpacking across Europe. We try to call him. We try to track him down. We post it on his Facebook. He's not responding, whatever, right? We need this order to cremate because this is what they wanted. And then the judge would make that decision. And then you've had that decision, and now you can.
So you just said something that I think is really critical, and I want to really put a big flag on this for people, to acknowledge. I think, and I imagine a lot of our lay people in the law, the listeners, kind of had Orphans Court in the, okay, I've already messed up or there's a problem and now we're going to orphans court. I don't think I understood that could be a front loaded aspect of things.
Absolutely.
And so it's really important. I want to just hit that point right now is in your workflow and process. And maybe this is something for cemeteries too, to build into their process to educate their clients, right? Is that if you're going to do this change and you don't know that you're going to be in a position where you can truly get majority buy-in on this decision, go to the Orphans Code. There's steps. Do the reach. Make sure to document. Go to Orphans Court, right? If someone is maybe not in the right mental state or whatever.